The next thing we're gonna do is something that we started off with actually, which is lip trills and tongue trills. So we're gonna start off with just the regular lip trill that you would do maybe in warm-ups. Now, if you actually have difficulty doing lip trills, or if your lip trills are always like really floppy or whatever, what you actually want to do is take your two fingers and just put them right here. You actually have muscles right here that you will develop and build as you do certain beatbox sounds and lip trills and whatever. If you are having difficulty, either do this, or you can kind of tighten your face up and get. From here, you can kind of change your sound a little bit. You can apply more pressure or less pressure. I'm probably going to spit it a little bit. It's normal. My teeth are actually touching, so I'm doing. You get really cool sounds once you start altering your vowel shape and changing the way that your teeth touch, or making it so that they don't touch specifically. Take a listen to this. Those are lip trills, and what I'm doing is I'm alternating between E and U sounds with my tongue and my teeth touching and not touching, and you can probably play around with it. It becomes a little bit more intuitive once you start playing around with the sounds. The alternative sound is the tongue trill. This sound a lot of people have difficulty with. It sounds like this. I'm going to teach you how I actually learned this sound. I actually came up with a snare that sounds like. I said T, but I kept my tongue up there and forced it up there, so I get, and then I just keep blowing air out afterwards. Now what I did from there was I slowly relaxed my tongue so that the vibrations will get lower and lower in pitch. So kind of like for lip trills, you get lower pitch by flapping them slower with the tongue. And eventually I got there and I was able to sustain it. The alternative way to learn it is if you again do that T shape and you kind of blow air out, making sure that there's just a little bit of pressure being applied upwards, just a tiny bit, and allow your tongue to naturally flap. Now this is going to take you a lot of time to figure out if you haven't already. Don't be afraid to spend a decent amount of time actually just working on the sound and trying to get that to actually happen. A lot of people, for the beatboxers out there, are like, oh, I want to learn throat bass. I know how to, right? The next thing I need to do is throat bass. It sounds sick. There's kind of two things about that. Firstly, I think throat bass is super overrated. It's just like the one thing that like the next step for beatboxers, right? It's like, that's what everyone knows. But really, I think the tongue trill is far better than throat bass in all ways. Until you learn, I'm going to call it true throat bass. I'm going to demonstrate that later actually, so don't worry about that now. Just know that the tongue trill is better, and here's why. First thing, we're going to add a filter to this tongue trill. So start off with, right? Now we're going to make an F shape with our lips while still fluttering your tongue, and this might be a little bit hard at first, but you'll kind of figure it out after a little bit of time. So it kind of sounds like a drum roll. And you use this in, for example, trap beats, where you have your triplet hi-hats. You do. And so it acts as the like ultra triplet part of that, because you can actually do hi-hats that quickly. And you can, again, play with the sweet spot, figure out what kind of a sound you want to produce. This is very useful both in an acapella standpoint, also it's just cool extra decoration, articulation on top of your beats. Now the other thing that is what allows us to trump throat bass, you can make sick dubsteppy sounds with this. I'm going to demonstrate it. It sounds like. What I'm actually doing here is I'm applying a ton of pressure up on my tongue so that instead of getting, I'm going to apply pressure. You get that like really like vibrating sound. From there, change your mouth shape, change your vowel shape, you get that wob wob wob. And you'll notice I do actually puff out my cheeks a little bit, and that allows a slightly dimmer resonance. So if you start talking about the overtones, that kind of dims everything out even more. So now with tongue trills, you can actually do them backwards by breathing air in, right? So there's something you can do with that. And all I'm doing is breathing in, and my tongue, instead of fluttering at the top, it's fluttering kind of like backwards like that. There's this thing called a Slizzer Roll, which is flapping just the side of your tongue. That sounds like, kind of sounds like Perry the Platypus. There's also the very blown up and was very overhyped at one point sound called the lip roll, which I don't do a proper version of, but it sounds like. And this sound took me years. Like, I spent so long on this, and I was just like, I would be walking down the street just being like, just looking like an idiot. But the time paid off and allowed me to do this sound. And in case you're curious, that sound, if you slow it down, basically sounds like doing a bunch of kicks really quickly. So it sounds like basically. So those are all sounds that you can search up online. There's a bunch of tutorials for them if you are curious about them. One more thing before we start doing some kind of wacky things. First thing is going to be wind effects. These are really relevant in acapella because you suddenly start getting these nice sound effects that you can get. And you can add that kind of ambience to any part. Really all you're doing is breathing air out and adding resistance in some way and letting the resonance in your mouth alter the sound of the wind. You can relate this back to overtones or vowel shapes if you want, where you can understand the shape of your mouth itself to get a specific target sound. Sounds like this are one of the few sounds in a beatbox that you should not overdo. And if you're feeling pain in your throat, stop, go have some water, take a break, and maybe just crack at it the next day. And it really does take time for your throat internals, whatever is flapping to make the sound, to actually be able to generate the sound comfortably. Now, I've been doing it for a while, so I'm pretty okay with it. But when I first started doing it, I could only do like one note. And if I tried to change to a different note, that would actually hurt. So I had to train myself to be able to do more things. So it sounds like to get that, what you can do is cough. So you're gonna and then that's how you get that gritty sound out, right? Even just doing a little bit of that, I'm starting to feel a little bit of raspiness just because I haven't practiced it too much. So again, make sure that you do have water. Again, really, this is one of those sounds that just takes time, so I can't really give you any more explanation besides just do it. Often when people talk about throat bass, maybe if you're a little more familiar with beatboxing, is when you add a voice to it. So that sounds like I don't actually practice the sound, and this actually hurts my throat a little bit more than the regular one, just because I'm not used to practicing it. But ultimately, all you're doing is you're doing the original and you're adding a voice. And for me, I actually, when I do this, it makes it easier for me to be creating these sounds. So if I ever do that's just because it's, my body just feels like that's easier for me. Again, don't be afraid to make weird shapes and faces and whatever to get the sound that you're trying to do. So often enough, when a beginner beatboxer first learns throat bass, they'll be like and like rhythm gets thrown out of the window. It's important to remember that now that you've got this sound that you have to use, it still needs to fit in musically. You can't just go off and be like, hey, I have this cool sound, I'm gonna throw it in, and then suddenly tempo doesn't exist. So make sure that if you're doing it, if say you're doing wobbles, you can do triplets, right? Or quadruplets, right, for example, and making sure that whatever sound that you're doing fits into the context of what you're doing. Now, there is a sound called the inwards bass. There's a bunch of different sounds that just sound really good on mic. And this is another one of them. It just sounds like a sick rumble on the floor. If you have some subs, oh, you're gonna feel it. How you do this is you breathe in, but you sing while breathing in. So if you're like, I are you, It sounds gross. Now do that, but relax a little bit more. You can kind of find a sweet spot. There's a really warm and rich sound that you can get. I don't have that quite yet, but it is absolutely attainable, and there's a lot of tutorials on like finding the sweet spot and other stuff that you can do with this. So there you go. Now we're gonna do a little bit of fun stuff and go a little bit more into this idea of sound design and sound engineering. I just taught you a bunch of different sounds and effects. You'll notice that there's a bunch of different things that you can do to each sound to tweak it, to kind of change it, such that it basically becomes a different sound. And a lot of the other sounds are just sounds of two things put together. For example, the trumpet is a voice with a filter. Overtones are a voice with a filter. Throat bass is singing on top of growling. And so you can start thinking about what if you can start putting them all together. And this is kind of you can kind of analogize this into FM synthesis. Andrew Huang did 2 videos that are really great and really relevant. One is a video on the harmonic series, basically talking about all the stuff that I did about overtones and more. It's sick, it's amazing. I would absolutely check it out. And the other one is on FM synthesis, and that's going to make a lot more sense if you look at that as well. When you warm up in with your voice, one of the things that we commonly do is lip trills, but while singing through it. So, right now, it's kind of a funny sound, it's kind of a silly sound, but if you think about what it's actually doing, you have a source, your main sound, and then you're filtering it by cutting off the sound constantly, and this is really just a really low pitch square wave, something along those lines, right? When you take a really slow square wave and put a sine wave on top of it, basically you make a sine wave that looks like this. What that is now you have these peaks of volume where it goes, which is ultimately, the sound is cutting in and out, and that's what's happening with all of these. And once you start combining them together, once the frequency starts coming a lot closer, instead of A affecting B, you actually get kind of like a weird homogeneous combination. For example, in throat bass, where you do because the frequencies are a lot closer together. One thing that you could do with this, for example, with lip trills, there's a guy named Gene. He's a beatboxer. He's the guy that I first saw the lip roll from. He does a thing where he sings a fifth above his lip trill. Now, I don't practice this, but it's something along the lines of like, and basically he's just singing power chords up and down.
Do you remember?
This is another example of getting like a more rich sound by combining a bunch of different things. The cool part about throat bass that you can actually do with your voice trumpet. Now, if you think about the Growl Trumpet sound, right? You get that nice grunt to it, and I'm doing that by, but you can see this all comes from combining the sounds together in a weird way and kind of triggering different things. For example, it is not going to sound great, but you can do a lip trill on top of a tongue trill, probably on top of sing, and maybe on top of throat bass. So we're going to do that. So lip trill, tongue trill with lip trill, and already that sounds gross. Sing with it, and then throat bass with that. I guess we can't do it, but experimentation, right? Now another thing, this isn't Mongolian throat sing. I'm pretty sure it's not, but it kind of sounds like it, which is throat bass plus overtones. So those are all things that you can do just by mixing the sounds together. If you can whistle, I can't actually whistle. You can flutter your tongue or do a uvula flutter. I don't know how to do those either, but by doing that, you can get a cricket sound, basically. Which is also really sick. I wish I could do that, but I can't. Nick Richardson, he does a lip trill, or lip roll outwards. Now, mine is terrible, but his sounds pretty sick.
The basic sound with a kick before the sound, and you can add in some vowel modulation.
If you're interested in some more of this kind of stuff, Darnie has a bunch of like just really cool stuff on him coming up with weird sounds. What I want you to take out of this entire workshop, one, hopefully you've learned a few sounds that you could now do and show it off to your friends and be like, hey, check this out. Right? But also, I want to take two kind of overlying ideas. That one, it really does take time to learn these sounds and just to learn things in general. And sometimes you just have to sit down with it and put the time into it to achieve it. Often enough, I'll hear people was like, oh yeah, I just can't beatbox, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. And really, it's just you've given it one shot and you've never given it a second chance. Like, if you don't care for it particularly, that's fine. I know people that don't really care about beatbox, but maybe you do, and you don't feel like you can. And honestly, I've gone through so many phases with different sounds. I'm like, maybe my mouth just can't do it. But time and time again, I've learned that if I just put the time into it, I'll be able to get the sound. So really make sure you put the time into it. The other thing is just the general idea of sound design and engineering and understanding how sound works. For example, often your musical director might say, smile so that you sound happier. Now, that's true. It's absolutely correct. A little bit of understanding from that now is that when you smile, your mouth goes wider, your tongue goes a little bit higher, and that accentuates the higher overtones a little bit more. And so you get this bright sound that sounds happy. Now, if you're sad, you're going to have a longer face, and you're going to be a little bit more dimmer in sound, maybe a little bit more muddy. And so with those are some of the higher frequencies in the harmonics aren't there, and the lower harmonics are more prominent. Just overall understanding of how sound works. I hope you learned a lot from this workshop, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace out.